Hello everybody, this is Brett Lonsdale from Lightning Tools and welcome to another webinar from Lightning Tools. So today we're going to be talking about SharePoint permissions and specifically inside of SharePoint Online. So if you're fairly new to SharePoint Online, then hopefully you'll find this beneficial from a site owner's point of view, or if you just want to sort of revisit permissions and see whether you're doing the right thing, whether you've got the right idea of how permissions work, then also hopefully you'll be able to grab some gems from this webinar this afternoon. So first of all, I just want to quickly introduce myself, and then we're going to dive straight into some of the permission subjects that we're going to be taking a look at. And so as I mentioned, my name is Brett Lonsdale. I'm a co-founder of Lightning Tools. So we're in our 14th year of providing different tools and web parts for Microsoft SharePoint, both SharePoint on premises and also SharePoint Online and Microsoft Teams as well. I'm also the co-founder with my colleague Sandy Usia, and that is of a brand new company called NLightning. And NLightning is a organization that provides coaching. So not quite consultancy and not training, but coaching around the Power Platform and also SharePoint and Teams. So we do things like Power Automate and Power Apps coaching. And the idea is that if you've got something specific that you need to build, but not quite sure where to start, how to get going with it, we can coach you to building that solution. And also I'm a co-host on a podcast called Techsplaining. So if you go to techsplaining.net, you'll be able to listen to myself plus 3 other Microsoft MVPs. And we talk about lots of different things around technology, but mostly Microsoft 365. And it's really just a conversation that's recorded. So sometimes it can go a little bit off topic, but if you're wanting to listen to some gossip around technology, it's a great place to go. And as mentioned, I'm also a Microsoft Office Apps and Services MVP. So what we're going to talk about today is, obviously, as mentioned, SharePoint permissions, and we're going to focus on SharePoint permissions management from a business user point of view. So this is something that is a little bit different in SharePoint. So typically, in lots of other applications, the security and the permissions was always really the job of IT. They would make sure that the right security was set up for all of the users inside the organization. But going back, gosh knows how many years now, so probably about 20, the way that SharePoint was designed was that the business user could self-service. They could go through and create a team site if they needed one to help collaborate with their team members, to be able to share files and folders, to be able to set tasks and all those things that you can do inside a SharePoint team site. And one of the responsibilities, therefore, is as the owner, you get to choose who can see your content. So who has allowed or who is allowed access to your site, but also who has access to your files and your folders and so on. But that was quite a challenge for somebody that's not really grown up with technology. Maybe they're a salesperson, maybe they're working in finance or human resources or something like that. And now they've got this responsibility for understanding security and permissions around this entity that they manage, along with lots of files and folders and so on. And it is obviously quite a big responsibility in some organizations to make sure that content that isn't necessarily being created by you as an individual, but your team is created in the right place and is shared with the right people. And so that's what really this focus is all about in this webinar, is making sure we understand how to go about assigning permissions and the effects of assigning permissions in different ways as well. We'll also talk about some of the different groups, because there's quite a lot of different types of groups that you can create nowadays. So we'll talk about things like SharePoint groups and Microsoft 365 or Office 365 groups, as they're also known. And also security groups is something else that we'll be talking about, which isn't necessarily created inside of SharePoint or Microsoft 365, but can be used to set permissions and nest those groups into SharePoint groups as well. So we'll make sure that everybody's clear on what type of groups to use when you're inside of SharePoint and also maybe Teams as well. So there's also permission levels that we're going to be talking about. So we'll have an understanding of what the existing permission levels are all about, what sorts of permissions people get, depending on what permission level they're assigned. And we'll also talk about how to create custom permission levels as well. So sometimes the out-of-the-box permission levels don't quite do what you want to do. So we can rather than tweak those, we can go through and actually create a new one and assign all the relevant permissions that we want our users to have. We'll also talk about permission inheritance, which actually used to be quite a big subject and has become a lot less of a big subject now, with regards to the sort of flat hierarchy that you have inside of sites now. So the idea being that when we create sites before, we used to create a site collection and everybody would start creating subsites and so on, and the default would be to inherit the permissions from the parent site where that site was created. And you could break permission inheritance and so on. And it all got very confusing with the groups mostly, because you could go through and set a membership to a group, not realizing that that user that you just added to a group doesn't just get permissions to that site, but also many other sites as well throughout the site collection. So we'll talk about how that's changed, and also we'll talk about permission inheritance around files and folders as well, so you understand what happens when you share a link to a file or to a folder, and what happens with the permission inheritance. And hopefully we'll throw in a couple of nuggets there about how to maybe avoid that broken permission inheritance around files and folders as well, just by thinking a little bit more carefully around how the lists and the libraries are structured within inside our sites. And we're also going to take a look at the site sharing settings. So what you'll notice when you're inside a modern SharePoint site is there are some sharing settings on the right-hand panel. So we'll take a look at those, make sure everybody's clear on what they do. And then we're also going to take a look at a related subject, which is inside the SharePoint Admin Center, where we can go through and configure sharing policies, which actually affect the level that you can set inside your site sharing settings. So there's, if you like, a sort of organizational level or tenant level policy that you can apply across the board, but then you can go through and tweak it per site. And you can either do that with inside the site itself or also through the SharePoint Admin Center. So we'll take a look at some of that. Now, optionally, well, in fact, the whole thing is optional. You can drop off at any point. But yeah, optionally, at the very end, after a quick Q&A, we're going to have an overview of one of our permissions products. So we're not going to talk about that for 95% of this webinar. But at the very end, we'll jump into DeliverPoint and show you how DeliverPoint can also help with permissions management from a sort of bulk permissions management and improved reporting point of view. So yeah, that's the agenda. So what we're going to jump into, first of all, is just a slide about all the different things that we've got to consider when we're assigning permissions and how the permissions all work. And what you'll notice is the slide is actually quite complicated. There's lots of arrows going all over the place, and no wonder we get confused about permissions. So where I'm going to start is over on the left-hand side with the people. So people being users. These are actual people such as Julio and Sandy. So those users are added into our Microsoft 365 tenant, and now we want to add them to our site somehow to give them permissions. And there's different ways in which we can do that, and I'm going to show you that in a demonstration in just a moment. So there's one way of assigning permissions straight away. And one way of assigning permissions is when we create a new site, depending on the type of site that it is. If we create a team site, one of the things we're presented with now, if that's a brand new flat hierarchy new site collection, is the ability to create some Microsoft 365 or Office 365 groups. And those Office 365 groups will be created for us, and we'll get an email and or an email address for this particular group that we're creating, plus a number of other things that we'll talk about in a moment. But we're going to basically get a site that belongs to a group. And we've got the option of adding the users, the people, to those Office 365 groups at that point. Now, one of the things to consider is that group didn't exist until now, so it doesn't have any permissions to anything else. Just the users that you add to that group will have access to your site. And you'll notice that there's one for the owners and there's also one for the members, and we'll take a look at that in just a moment. There's also Active Directory security groups, and that's a little bit different. So these are Active Directory security groups that actually live inside the Active Directory. They are separate to Microsoft 365, and they've been designed around your organization and not necessarily around SharePoint. So you might have that they have been created for departments or for locations inside your organization. Maybe you've got like a sales department, human resources department, and so on, and there's a security group created with all of the salespeople and all of the human resources individuals inside that or inside those groups. Now, what we can do is take those groups and assign permissions to them as well, either directly or also through SharePoint groups. And one of the challenges with that as a site owner, as a non-IT person, is you have no control or visibility as to who is inside those groups. You can't add or remove people to it. You can't see who's in there. So you're sort of having this trust that, yeah, the right people are inside this group and I'm going to put that group inside my site. So anybody within inside that group will have permissions, but bearing in mind they could also have permissions to other things as well throughout SharePoint. So we've got the Active Directory security groups and the Office 365 groups, and they actually become security groups in their own right. So you create an Office 365 group, it will exist as a security group, but you just happen to also get these other things inside of Microsoft 365, like a planner and Yammer and shared calendar and so on. So then we come to SharePoint groups, and there's three by default that we're going to talk about. There's the owners, the members, and the visitors. So you're always going to get one of these when you create a new site if that site has unique permissions, and it will be named after the site. So if we call our site Site A, it'll be Site A owners, Site A members, and Site A visitors. The owners SharePoint group is assigned full control, permissions to your site, and members is assigned edit, and visitors is assigned read. So what you'll find is when you create a new site, and you've got your new Office 365 group, which is a security group, that becomes a member in its own right. So adding members to your Office 365 group is also adding them to the members group, but via a nested security group. So that group itself is a member of this, but you can also add members directly as well to your SharePoint group. So these are the permission levels that those groups get, and they are all made up of individual permissions that fall into three categories. There's approximately like 60 different permissions. Some of them are site permissions, some are list permissions, and some of them are personal permissions. So the things like, can you create items? Can you update items? Can you delete items? And so on. So they're all organized into these permission levels, and the permission levels can then be granted to a group, a SharePoint group. You can, if you want, add a user, as you can see from the arrows, directly to a permission level, but that's really not recommended. Unfortunately, it does happen a little bit in SharePoint around files and folders, and I'll show you that. So the recommended approach is to actually take your users and either put them into the SharePoint groups or put them into the Office 365 groups, and we'll take a look at how that's done in just a moment. So just to sort of clarify the difference between those three groups, the security groups are defined by your organization. They may have like predated SharePoint in a lot of cases. They're designed departmentally and so on, or around organizational locations, and you cannot view the membership inside of SharePoint or change that membership inside of SharePoint. But they are a useful way to say, you know, if you're a salesperson, I want you to have access to this sales team site that I just created, and therefore I'm going to add that group into it. But the trust there is on if you've got somebody that ceases to be a salesperson, becomes a member of another department, we can't do anything about that. We have to ask IT to take that user out of that sales group and move them to whatever group they need to be in now. So then there's the Office 365 groups. You do have visibility of those. You can change them, even though they are, at the end of the day, a security group. You've got that interface through Microsoft 365 to view and change the memberships. And you're creating those groups at the point of either creating a site inside of SharePoint, or you can also create them in other ways as well in Microsoft 365 through things like Outlook and Yammer and so on. So yeah, Outlook, Yammer, SharePoint Online Planner are some of the places where you can create an Office 365 group. And what you get is not just a group, but you also get a shared inbox, you get a calendar that's shared, you get a shared document library, you get a OneNote, notebook. You also get a SharePoint team site and of course Planner as well. So you get all of that plus the actual security group. So then there's the SharePoint groups, and every single time you create a SharePoint site that has unique permissions, you're going to create these three groups, but you can also create custom groups as well if you want to. So you don't have to stick with the standard owners, members, and visitors. You can go beyond that. Okay, so when do you create an Office 365 group? Basically, if you need more than just a SharePoint site, and this can get a little bit confusing as well. If you've come from sort of SharePoint from many years ago, or from using SharePoint on premises, you'll have created a new SharePoint site. And that SharePoint site, as you know, will have a document library. It will also have the ability to have things like task lists and contact lists and links lists and what have you. And you can create subsites, etc. And this is the object where you go to collaborate. It doesn't have all these other things that an Office 365 group has. It doesn't have an email address. You can't. Well, you do have an events list which has a calendar view. So you could use that, but it's not quite a shared calendar that you would use through Outlook and so on. It doesn't have any integration with Planner, but it does, as mentioned, have a task list. And you don't get that group for conversations in Yammer either, but you do have like this discussion list inside of the SharePoint site. So really what we're doing is sort of transitioning from using a SharePoint site in its own right to be the collaboration tool to actually collaborating through the whole of Microsoft 365 with Outlook, for calendar access and email with that specific email address, and also using Planner and conversations in Yammer as some of the other tools that you get. Plus, like I say, you get to use this for setting security. But you can create a site without those things if all you really need is the SharePoint side of it. If you just need to be able to go in and share some documents inside the document library and just use a basic task list without the real need for Microsoft Planner, it's possible to do all of that. Okay, so what we're going to do is jump into a demonstration, and hopefully if you're confused by everything I just said, it will start to become clear. What we're going to do first of all is create a new team site. So we're going to start from scratch. And I'm in SharePoint now, but what we're going to do is just click onto SharePoint at the top here, as though we'd accessed it from the waffle menu on the left-hand side here. So we're going to go through and select SharePoint. So I could do it by viewing all apps or just clicking here. There we go. So we're going to jump into SharePoint, and I'm going to click onto Create Site. And when I create a new site, notice we've got a choice of a team site or a communication site. I'm going to briefly just show you the differences. So if I jump into a communication site, you'll notice what it's asking me for is a site name. So I could call this Brett's communication site. And really what I'm creating here is a landing page, and it's going to look nice. I can give it a description and so on and hit finish. And what you'll notice once this is created is, like I say, I've got a nice looking site. There's no quick launch over on the left hand side. I don't have any access to anything there. It's basically a full width web page. And we do have the ability to do everything that you would ordinarily do inside of SharePoint. So we can go to the site contents, we can add lists and libraries. As mentioned, we've got things like document libraries and events and things like that. We can create new lists, additional libraries, and so on. We can even create subsites to this. What it didn't ask me to do was to do anything around the creation of any groups or anything like that at the moment. I've just created a site, that's it. But up in the right hand corner here is the ability to share it. So I can click on to share, and this is where you're going to see I've got those 3 SharePoint groups that we mentioned. So we've got site owners, site members, and site visitors that got created. And in the top here, we can share this with those users. We can share it with Office 365 groups, as it's mentioning here, and also security groups as well. So these are the AD security groups that we mentioned that we can add to the site. So if I wanted to add a user, I could, for example, just add in demo user 9, give demo user 9 permissions. I could also add, if we start typing in sales, you'll notice these are all the Office 365 groups that have been created. So even though you created a new Office 365 group by creating a team site, that group may be assigned permissions to somebody else's site if they so choose. So we can go through and add those groups as well. But you'll notice the one at the top here looks a little bit different, and that is a Active Directory security group. So notice these users are getting read here when I'm going through and adding them to those groups. So this is where we're adding the AD groups and we're adding users, and anybody there will now get permissions when I click onto share, and they'll be able to access my page and so on. So that's a communication site. It doesn't create a Office 365 group. If we go through and create a new team site, There's no avoiding the creation of the Office 365 group. Notice that if we give it a name, so Brett's team site, that the first thing that happens is it checks whether the site name is available, whether the group alias is available, because it's actually going to create this as an email address, and whether the site address as well is also unique. So somebody could have given their site name a different title, but change the site address maybe for an acronym or something like that. Now, as I go through this, we do have some privacy settings, and that is, first of all, give everybody access in the organization to this site, or only members can access the site. So I'm going to go with the default that only members can access the site. And as I click next, you'll notice here that we've got the opportunity to add some owners and members. And what we're adding those owners and members to is basically the group. So you'll see here, if I go through and add maybe demo user 5 and demo user 6 as members, when we hit finish here, the site gets created. We can see that it's got 3 members in the top right hand corner here. And as we click onto those, we can see who those members are. So I, as the creator, am a member with owner permissions, but I've got demo user 5 and demo user 6 as members. Okay, and we can easily change them as well if we want to. But let's have a look at behind the scenes as to what's happened there. So we can click onto the cog icon and come down to site permissions. So in here we can expand again those 3 member groups. So you can see we've got Brett's team site owners that has the full control permission level, and we've got the Brett's team site members that has edit permissions. So when we go through to the advanced permission settings, we can sort of see that in a bit more detail as well. So these groups are the only things that have access to the site. If we click onto the members group, notice here we've got embedded the Office 365 group. So there's the email address of that Office 365 group. So the members of that have access. If we go through to the visitors, there's nobody in there. And if we look in the owners, it's not showing anybody in there either. But I will be set as the site collection admin. So it can be a little bit confusing, but hopefully you can see that sort of relationship to what we were talking about here. We just jump back with the SharePoint groups. So how I got those 3 SharePoint groups created, they're already mapped to the relevant permission levels. And we've also got the creation of this Office 365 group as well. So what we're going to do is just come in and add some additional permissions to this, which we can do. So clicking onto the cog icon and going to site permissions, we can invite people. So clicking onto invite people allows me to add the members to the group or share the site only. So keep in mind that if I add them to the group, I kind of lose control a little bit because I'm adding them to the group so that they can have access to these emails for the shared email address, and they have access to that shared calendar and the shared files inside the document library and so on, everything that belongs to that group. And it might not be that I want to do that, because that group could also be given permissions to another site as well. And that's the part where I lose that control. But what I can do is just say I want to only share the site. So I can just share the site only, and then they literally only have access to the site and not to the actual group. So the difference between these two, if I click onto the top option, so the group membership, I can add members to the group. So literally you can come in here. But what I want to show you here is also, if I start to type in sales, notice how there is no mention of that AD security group. I have another AD security group as well, which is, sorry, it's escaping me, accounts payable. So when I start typing that, it's not showing up. So I can't invite Active Directory group members to here, but I can add individual users. So that's literally the only thing we can add in here is the users or Office 365 groups in there. So here I could select demo user 1, for example, and save that, and we've got now a new member of that group. Whereas if we go back to the site permissions and click on invite people and share the site only, you'll notice that typing in sales and clicking onto search directory, there's our AD security group. So we can add that, and I can also add the accounts payable AD security group. So we can give access to SharePoint sites to AD security groups, but we can't make them members of the Office 365 groups. Okay, so yeah, just to also jump back in here, you'll notice that those groups are added as members, but the only challenge is, notice as I hover over the Brett's team site members, give it a few seconds and it will show you the members. So we can see exactly who the members of that group are, the Office 365 group. You don't get that with the AD security group. So I can leave my mouse hovering there forever, and it's not going to come up with the members. That can only be viewed through Active Directory itself. Okay, so hopefully that has given you an insight into creating team sites and adding users to existing groups or to a communication site. So let's have a look at permission inheritance. And like I mentioned, the permission inheritance really is not too much of a concern in the way that we now create sites in SharePoint. If you're still using classic site collections, then this kind of still applies. But if you're using the new modern sites, then every single time you create a new site from the SharePoint page, you're actually creating unique permissions each time. And that seems crazy because you're getting all of these different Office 365 groups being created all the while, and obviously lots of SharePoint groups being created all the while. But what you're not getting is this challenge where you've got hundreds or thousands of subsites and you have no clue whether they're inheriting permissions or whether they've got broken permission inheritance, whether they use each other's groups or not, and so on. It can all get quite messy. So if we just jump back for a moment, you'll notice that I still have that ability to create a subsite. So I'm going to just to show you that. So as we go to the subsites menu item, we can go through and create a new subsite. So I'm just going to call this a subsite because I'm not very imaginative today. And when we create a subsite, you'll notice here that we've got a choice. We can create a team site with no Office 365 group or a team site classic experience. And so basically there's no sort of creation of a new Office 365 group at all here. We're just going to inherit by default the same as the parent site. We can, if we want to, say, no, actually I want unique permissions. And if we do that, then it's going to create 3 new SharePoint groups. We'll have another owners, members, and visitors group being created, and they'll be called subsite A, a subsite members, a subsite owners, a subsite visitors, and so on. However, if we inherit, then this will go through and just inherit those permissions from the parent. Okay, so we can sort of extend the site collection by adding subsites if we want to. And you can see that that is now created. And as we jump down, if we have a look at the site permissions in here, as we expand these, it looks exactly the same as the parent site. So it's actually the same access control list. We're looking at the parent site. So it's getting all of its permissions from Brett's team site, the parent one. But we can stop inheriting, and this is where the confusion comes in. Because if I say innocently, I want to stop inheriting permissions, I want to have my own permission sets. So we've stopped inheriting that. It's going to allow me to create new groups. See, I'll create a brand new owners group, I'll create a brand new members group, and a brand new visitors group. So we've now got a subsite members, a subsite visitors, and a subsite owners. Click on OK. And that's it. They're now created, and now we can start sharing this site with those people. But where the mess comes in is if you actually go back and check what's gone on, notice that the old groups still remain. So if we at the top site start adding people into the owners group, or even into that Office 365 group, they will still get permissions to this site. So it's only if I actually now go through and remove these 3 groups here, if I remove those permissions, now they won't. But it's amazing how many times that step is missed, and you end up with people getting permissions to things that they shouldn't have permissions to through SharePoint. So it's always a good idea to go in, once you've broken the permission inheritance, go through and make sure you remove those 3 groups. But ideally, you'll be creating now the flat sites. So you just be going to that SharePoint, and creating a new site through here, and you're going to get unique permissions anyway each time, and you don't have that part to worry about. Okay, but it goes beyond the sites. So here we could have the orange subsites are orange because they're different from the root site if we break the permission inheritance. But within each subsite, we also have lists and we have libraries, and lists and libraries have items and folders. And of course, those folders have subfolders as well. And the same thing happens. So we do still get the permission inheritance issue. And sometimes that can't be avoided, but I'm going to show you how we can sort of design our site structure so that it is mostly avoided if we can. And I want to sort of talk about why we would want to avoid it as well. So we can share files and folders in a couple of different ways. So we can share a link or we can give direct access. And either of those is going to break the permission inheritance upon sharing, which I'm going to show you here. So as we jump back into SharePoint, okay, let's go back to Brett's team site. And at the moment, we don't have any folders or any files, so we're going to go through and create some. So we just have a folder called really private stuff. There we go, and one called just stuff. All right, so we've got two folders in here. Now these folders are inheriting permissions from the document library, and the document library is inheriting permissions from the site. So we're all good. Anybody that can modify things inside the site can modify things inside the file and folder, and so on. And you can check the permission inheritance by clicking onto the ellipsis here, and you can go to manage access. And over on the right hand side here, it will tell you who's got permissions. But if you want to be clear whether it's inheriting permissions or not, click onto advanced, and then you see this yellow banner. So it says the folder inherits permissions from its parent. Okay, so we know that because you saw me create it. But what we can do now, we can take our really private stuff folder, and as I click that, I can choose either the manage access or the share. I'm going to go with manage access first of all, and you'll notice that gives me an opportunity to just share, or I can grant access here. So when I'm granting access, we've got a choice of can those users edit or can they view. So I'm going to leave it on the can edit, and we're going to go through and add a user. So in here, I'm going to add a user called demo user 2. Okay, so we'll select demo user 2, and I'm going to choose grant access. So demo user 2 now gets an email and is granted access to that particular folder. So let's have a look at what happens behind the scenes when we go to the advanced view for that folder. This is where it's going to start tricking me. Just bear with me 1 second. Okay, actually, so this is where it's being smart, and of course I intended to do this. Demo user 2 already has permissions, which is why I kind of hesitated through one of the groups already. So what we're going to do is just go through and manage that access again. So demo user, let me try and choose demo user 12. I think I'm safe on that one. Yeah, great. So you can see the first time I did that, it didn't break the permission inheritance because it was smart enough to realize that the first account already had permissions, so there was no need to break the permission inheritance. But demo user 12 didn't already have permissions to the site or to the folder, and therefore the permission inheritance on that folder was broken. And notice how that demo user 12 has been given permissions. And it's not edit either, which is what the menu item led us to believe. The user's actually been given contribute permissions, which is good. It's just that the menu's wrong. So they've got contribute permissions, so they can create items and update items and delete items inside the folder and so on. But that permission has been given directly. And where that becomes a challenge, imagine if this has happened for demo user 12 inside your organization across thousands of files, which is quite possible. And then demo user 12 leaves the organization. Now, there's no security concern here because what's going to happen is demo user 12's account is basically going to be disabled, so they can't authenticate or access anything. But you're going to get from time to time somebody say, hey, how can demo user 12 still access this folder when demo user 12 left the organization years ago? So they're still going to show up. They're never going to disappear just because you've deleted or disabled their Active Directory user account. All right, so that's a challenge, but also the fact that you've got unique permissions is a challenge as well. Because if you add a new group to your site and give that site permissions to that group permissions to the site, that group's not going to get permissions to your folder. That's going to be different. It's got a different ACL to the folder. So this is really best avoided if at all possible. And the way that we can avoid it, the best advice I can give is to always think about actually what you're going to do, because it's quite tempting to just realize that, hey, I've created a folder, I need to share that folder with this group of people or these individuals. When actually, is there any reason why they can't have access to the site? Because if we give them access to the site, then we're not breaking any permission inheritance at all. If we don't want them to have access to the site, but there are some folders that we want them to access, then why not group those folders in its own document library? Because then we're not actually going through and breaking the permission inheritance all the time on individual files and folders and subfolders and so on, and losing control of it. We could actually go through and have our sort of general document library, which is for people at the site level. But if we go through and click onto site contents, if, for example, we had a particular region of salespeople or something like that that need access to maybe purchase orders, or maybe the accounts department needs access to purchase orders, which is belonging inside the sales site, we could go through and create a new document library called purchase orders, and we can break the permission inheritance on the document library. So as we go through to the library settings here, you can go through to the permissions for this library, and I can stop inheriting permissions at that level. So now you can create as many folders as you want inside that library without having to share it, without having to break permission inheritance all the time. You're just setting the permissions at the library level, and then you've only broken that permission inheritance the once and not many, many times inside the library. So there's ways to avoid it, and if you can, it's a good idea. It's going to not only sort of cause challenges as people leave the organizations and change roles where you've got all these direct permissions, but it's also going to help with performance as well, because there's less security trimming having to be done when you're navigating around SharePoint as these users. Okay, so sharing files and folders, that's one way that I just showed you. That was giving direct access. There is another way as well. So what we can do is go into a list or a library, and we can share the link. So with this, I can just hit share. And in here, we've got a few different choices. And you'll notice the top option here is grayed out. We can't select it by default. That's anyone with the link. And I'll show you how we can enable that one in a moment. We've also got people in the Lightning Tools product demo. We can share that with the link. So it's anybody within my tenant. Basically, my tenant is called product demo. So anybody that's already in the tenant, we could give them the link and they can access this. So really anybody in the organization. We can also create a link for anybody with existing access. So that's not necessarily anybody in the organization, but people who already have permissions to my site. I can then say, hey, here's a link to a folder, but they'd have access to it anyway. And then we can also choose specific people. And when we choose specific people, notice that we've got the allow editing, which you can decide whether you want to allow that or not. And when we hit apply, we can then specify who those people are. So in here, we can add some external email addresses if we want to. So there's an external one, it's my Gmail account. And notice that we can then go ahead and copy the link or send an email to that person with the link. If I just copy the link, that's copied. And we could access that just by going to the link here. So that takes me straight to that folder. And let's have a look at what's happened to the permission levels. So in here, we'll go to Manage Access, and we'll go down to Advanced. Okay, and notice that the folder has unique permissions. And what's happened is you can't see any difference in here like you did with the direct access. but basically there's a hidden group created with those specific people in it, and that group has been given access to this folder. So it still had to break the permission inheritance on the folder, but you do have that option to go through and manage the links to remove those users. So notice in here it now shows that there is a link there, so you can copy it from here, and in the drop down we've got the ability to change that if we want to. Okay. So either way, it's going to break the permission inheritance, which is something that if we can, it's a good idea to avoid it. So you can also create custom permission levels as well. So we talked about contribute and edit just there, but we didn't really discuss the differences between them. So now that we're creating sites with a flat hierarchy, this is usually stuff that you would do as the site collection admin in the top level site. But guess what? By creating a site in this way, you are effectively the site collection admin with access to the top level site. So when you go into the site permissions and click onto the advanced permission settings within the site that you created, you'll notice at the top is the ability to go through and access the permission levels. So here we can see our 3 SharePoint groups with the edit, full control, and read. If we click onto the permission levels in here, you can see them once again. And what we can now do is actually click onto these to see what permissions those permission levels contain. So you can see, for example, as I click onto design, that effectively it has all of the list of permissions. So it has the ability to add items, edit items, delete items, view items, etc. We've also got some site permissions, but not all of them. So if you were a designer, you can't create subsites. You can't view web analytics data and things like that. But you do get all the personal permissions. You can create personal views and lists. You can have personal web parts and so on. So these permission levels, although you can change it, don't. Or just don't. There's no but. So don't change those. The reason for that is it's just going to cause confusion. If your design can do one thing in one site but can't do something else in another site, you're going to lose your marbles by the time you've figured all of that out. So what you can do, if you're interested in having a slightly different permission level, and I'm going to take contribute as an example, is I can go into contribute, and maybe I want somebody who can do everything that the contributor can. They can create items, they can edit items, they can view items, but I really don't want them to delete items. So what we can do in here is actually go and copy the permission level rather than create it from scratch, which gives us a big head start. And we can give it a name. So I'll call this Brett's custom contribute. And I like to just put sort of hyphen there explaining what it is. So no delete. And we can put that in here as well. And then we can go through and remove the permissions that we don't want this user to have. So I can take away the delete items. And just as a tip, if you're removing delete items, remove delete versions, because otherwise they could actually still view the version history and delete all the previous versions, which we don't want them to do. So we can stop the deleting of versions and stop the deleting of items, hit create, and we've now got a custom permission level, and we can go and assign that. And where we can assign it is either directly, which again we want to avoid, because otherwise we're just running into those same issues that we had before. Or what we can do, let me just jump back to the home page here. So what we can do is go to the site permissions, go into this advanced permission settings page, and we can create our own group. So where we've got the members, owners, and visitors, I can actually go through and create my own group. So in here, I'm going to have Brett's contributors without delete. And notice in here we've got a group owner. So the group owner is going to default to you effectively. One of the challenges with that is what happens if you leave. Nobody can actually change the membership of the group, because notice the next settings down, who can view the membership of the group, group members, who can edit the members of the group owner, but the group owner's left, so nobody can now. So what you can do here, since we don't want to give group members the ability to modify the group membership, is actually just put in the owner's group. So we can put in Brett's, whatever it was called, team site owners. So anybody that becomes the owner of this site can change it. So a little tip there. And then we can go through and choose what permission level we want this group to have. And there's my custom contribute with no delete at the bottom there. So we'll go through and assign that permission level. And now we can assign users to our group. So from the actions, from the new menu, we go to add users to that group. So in here, we could add, for example, demo user 4 or whatever, and give them access via that. And there we go. That's our new group. You can remove users from there. You can also make it the default group. And one benefit of that is if you make this as a default group and you share the site with somebody, they're going to default to this group over the members group. So if you want them to get contribute and not edit, that's one way of doing it sort of cleanly with inside your site. Okay, so they're the sort of permission levels that you've got. You'll also notice there are some site sharing settings. So when you saw me sharing those files and folders a moment ago, one of the things that you saw was the ability to obviously share it with external users and so on. But it's not just the site owner that can do that. Members can as well. So if you think that you may have shared a folder or a file with a member, that's why they get contribute, so that they can't do this. If you share the site with somebody and they get edit, then they can actually go through and share files and folders with other people. So you may or may not want that to happen. So that's something that you can go through and change in the site sharing settings, and I'll show you where to do that in just a moment. So the options are for site owners and members to be able to share, and the users will get edit permissions, but anybody they share with gets edit permissions and they can share too. You can also allow site owners and members and people with edit permissions can share files and folders, but only site owners can share the site. So that's a bit more sensible. We're just allowing them to share any files or folders and not the site itself. And if they do that, remember that they get contribute permissions, the people that you shared with. And only site owners can share files or folders, and the site is the other option. So that's the sort of control freak one. You're basically saying that only I can go through and share this. I'm going to own this myself. You can also turn on access requests. So the access requests, if they're switched on, people can request access, and you can specify an email address for them to go to, or go to the owners group. And you can then go through and allow access through that. So yeah, this we actually already did. So creating a custom permission level and a custom SharePoint group. So let's have a look at where those sharing settings are, because I also want to show you how you can control that through the SharePoint Central Admin, or sorry, SharePoint Admin Center as well. So in your site here, when we go to site permissions, there's also a link under site sharing to change how members can share. And as we click onto that, that's where you're going to see those options. So this is where we can restrict who actually can share the site and everything in it. And of course, turn on the allow access requests if we want to as well. And that's where you can have that specific email set. Okay, so there's those settings. And now I'm also going to jump into the SharePoint Admin Center. So it's actually open here. Let's just go the long way around. So I'm going to click onto Admin. So this is going to load my SharePoint Admin Center. And inside the SharePoint Admin Center, we're going to click on the Show All and scroll down and click onto SharePoint. Now, if you are a business user, you're not a tenant admin, you're not a SharePoint admin, you won't be able to come in here, but it's useful for you to know that this stuff exists. So under the policies section, as we expand that, you'll notice there's sharing options. And I've got mine set to the most permissive. So this might confuse you a little bit, because when I set that to most permissive, that's not the default. By the way, I've set it there for a reason. So anybody, we have the option with inside the site to share with anyone. And you saw when I tried to do that it was grayed out. So this is basically an organization-wide setting. So this is the most permissive that you can do on individual sites, but it doesn't necessarily mean to say that the site owner has to allow that, or even the tenant admin has to allow that. So we can restrict that, so anybody can share. Anybody with edit can share, and if they do, they can share with anybody with the link. So there's no requirement for authentication. If you have the link, you can access it, full stop. You can bring that down to new and existing guests, but they need to authenticate. There's also this one here, which is existing guests already in the organization directory. So if you had vendors that need access to your tenant or something like that, you could register them as guests and then give them access, but you're not allowing anybody new to have access. And then the least permissive is just keeping it within inside your tenant and not allowing external sharing. So there's some options there, and as you scroll down, you'll see that there's some file and folder link sharing options as well. So do you want this to default to only people in your organization, or you can basically change that type of link, and you've got the default permission that users would get, either view or edit, and remember that's contribute, not edit, and then also the expiry. So in here you can specify that these links will expire after a certain amount of days, and you can do that as you share it, but if you want to set a default value there, then that's something that you can do. Now if you want to then control that on a site-by-site basis, as we expand sites here and click onto our active sites, so in here this is called Brett's team site, so I can select this one and click onto sharing. And notice here that we've got that external sharing setting. So if I set this to anyone, that's allowed in my tenant. If I'd reduced that in the sharing policy, I wouldn't be able to do this, but yeah, I can. So I'll set that to anyone and save that, and hopefully this will take effect straight away. Let me just do a refresh anyway. So now if I go to share, we can now share with anyone. So anyone with a link could edit my folder, and we can set that expiry date, and if we want to, set a password on it. But as I apply that, literally I could give you this link in the chat window or something, and you'll be able to access that folder. So it's anybody with the link there. Okay, so just jumping back to the admin center. One nice thing, quite a lot of people miss this as well, is you'll notice as I select more than one, that menu, the sharing menu, disappears, but it is still there under bulk edit. Okay, so you can select up to 30 sites and go to the sharing and then change the external sharing options. So in there you can restrict it right down, even though you may allow up to anybody, least permissive setting inside the policy, you could restrict it down on a site-by-site basis for different departments. Okay, so if you're concerned, the reason why I wanted to show you that as a sort of site owner is if you're concerned that anyone with a link can share stuff and you don't want that to happen in the site that you own and you're going to take responsibility for, you could speak to your tenant admin or your SharePoint admin and say, could you please reduce that down so that nobody can actually share with anyone with inside my site. All right, so there's a couple of the different options in there that we talked about. So what I'm going to do now, since we've just got a few minutes left, is just talk about a couple of things, and we're going to open up for some questions. So where we can help you, we do have a permissions management tool that I'm going to jump into after this. So we'll just go through and give a 5-minute demo on what DeliverPoint can do for you from a site owner point of view, and also as a tenant admin, how we can improve the permissions management, and also NLightning as well can help with coaching. So if you require coaching around SharePoint and Teams permissions with inside your environment to help you with setting up the permissions in an ideal way, that's something that we can also offer. So I'm going to open up for questions now for those that don't want to stay on, and then we'll just do a quick 5-minute walk through DeliverPoint at the very end. So if you do have questions, you can raise your hand or you can send them in the chat window. And if you raise your hand, I'll be able to unmute you. Okay, so we do have a question here. Let me just somehow unpin my questions panel so I can see those. Great, we've got a few questions. Okay, could you explain a bit what is Yammer and how to access them from groups? Thanks in advance. Yeah, so Yammer is a communication tool. So basically, it's something you can access. Let me just Alt Tab and show you. So from here, you can access Yammer on the menu. On the left-hand side, it's going to take us into Yammer, and basically, it's where you can go through and maybe post messages and so on. Actually, I've not got it configured, so I can't show you. But yeah, you can post status updates, you can post questions, people can reply to you, that sort of thing. So you can access it directly through Yammer. You can also access it through the communications app inside of Teams and so on as well, and just basically engage your users in conversation. And rather than having everybody inside the organization, you could just concentrate on your group that you created, so you can have a great conversation through a communication platform through an Office 365 group. So I hope that answers that question there. Also, how does all of this relate to Teams? So great question there. So actually, every single time you create a new team, or if you create a new team, you're basically getting a new SharePoint site behind the scenes. So everything that you've seen, all of the sharing in the files tab inside of Teams and so on, you're effectively doing the same thing when it comes to sharing files and folders. So the groups are the same, the members are the same. So yeah, everything really applies. It's exactly the same stuff. Okay, and then I think this is a follow-on question. So if these groups might not be good for students to have a discussion forum, I got stuck creating a group. Okay, so yeah, so Yammer might be a good alternative to that. We also have a product called Social Squared, which is a useful discussion forum tool. If the standard discussion list doesn't provide what you're looking for, but yeah, actually, if you were able to create a group using Yammer, that would be a good way to have a sort of communication channel. Okay, so I don't see any other questions, so I'm just going to jump a little bit into Deliver Point so you can see that, and we're going to work with this same site that we just created, that you saw me create, so within Brett's team site. And again, I'm just going to show you that up in the top right hand corner here, when we go to the site permissions, just a reminder, this is what we see. So you can't enumerate the accounts payable, you can't see who's inside sales. It's also not showing us any direct permissions in there. So we have to sort of dive in to the advanced in order to see that. So notice the Brett contributors with that delete group wasn't showing and things like that. So I'm going to just contrast that with Deliver Point for a moment and show you that up in the top right hand corner we've got this little icon, and it's giving me access to the main Deliver Point page, but also showing me a couple of the sort of more common reports as well, so I've got quick access to those. And one of them is a Discover Permissions. And when I come into this, the way that we do things differently with Deliver Point is we show literally everybody that's got permissions. If you're not here, you don't have permissions basically. So notice that those the custom permission level is showing, and we can see demo user 4 is permissioned via that. And we've also got people with edit permissions and people with full control. And as we go through and expand these members groups, you can see that these users have been granted permissions in different ways. So demo user 9 is in that sales Active Directory security group, nested inside the members group, and that's how they were permissioned. Whereas demo user 2 is inside accounts payable is nested into the members group, and that's how they were permissioned, and so on. So we always see how everybody is permissioned within inside the view here. This is something that we can also filter as well. So if I wanted to filter on that custom permission level, for example, I can see who's been granted permissions via that on my site and so on. So that's a sort of quick, easy report that you can execute from there. We also have a sharing links report. So as a site owner, I can execute that and see who shared what. So maybe we allow sharing files and folders with anybody, but then we can actually go in here and see, well, who actually did share it, when did they share it, and who did they share with. So that allows me to see that. So this one here, which was my Gmail account, I can see that demo at Lightning Tools product demo shared that today, and you saw me do that. So even if it was a anyone link that we now have, so when we go in here and we share this with anyone, and I copy the link, when we pull up that sharing links report, notice that that's now appearing. And the great thing is that if we don't want these, we can just select them. And from the actions menu here, I can go to sharing links management and delete those sharing links. So it's a great way of tidying all of that up. Now, the other thing that we can do is access the main deliver point page. And from there, we can control the entire tenant as long as we have access to do so. So here with the current site collection that we created, we can see the subsites and so on. And I can do things like pull up permission reports across multiple sites inside the same report. We can compare the permissions. So if we want to determine what's actually different between those two sites, why does this one have unique permissions? We can also reset the permission inheritance. So we can go through and inherit, and we can do that in bulk across multiple sites. And the other thing that you'll see here on the tree view is that purchase orders, that document library that I created with unique permissions, notice how it's got a different icon. The icon is in full color, whereas the documents one is dimmed, and that's because that has unique permissions. So it's showing me that that has unique permissions. So I'm not sort of wasting my efforts on other objects here that are perhaps inheriting. So in here, we've got the tenant view, and we can see all those different site collections and so on. We can jump down to a hub site view. If we want to see our hub sites and associated sites, we've also got classic site collections, teams as well. So we can go through and view teams in here and manage the permissions within our teams. And we've also got an accounts view. So if I was particularly interested in maybe demo user 2, I can select demo user 2, and from the reports menu, pull up a unique permissions report and see what groups that user is in, but also what unique site permissions that user is in as well, if there were any. So I think, who did we assign direct permissions to? I can't even remember now. Let me just try this one. Nope. Let me try myself. There we go, getting a bit more info. So, so in here, you can see this user is a member of Brett's team site, and it's through that custom permission level and so on. So if somebody was going to leave your organization, from there, you could say, this person's leaving, I want to transfer whatever permissions they have to somebody else, or I can copy them or just straightforward delete them and so on. So these are the types of reports that we offer. And we've also got the ability to do other things as well, like if somebody did leave, they still have permissions in SharePoint, we can go through and see them as dead accounts. We can see all the unlicensed users or the external users, that sort of thing. Also, this is really useful to do a discover permissions, but include just those items that have broken permission inheritance. So, so now we can, within one report, see any site permissions, any libraries or lists, and any folders or files that have unique permissions and who's got permissions to them, all in one report that can then be exported out to Excel. All right, so that's a very, very, very quick tour of DeliverPoint. It's also available for Teams as well, so you can go through and access it in Teams. And yeah, I'll bring the webinar to a close. So if there is any questions, you've got the email addresses here, so you can reach out to us on brett@lightningtools.com for anything related to DeliverPoint or SharePoint permissions, and likewise with brett@nlightningtech.com if you've got any questions around the coaching that we offer for permissions and SharePoint in general. But otherwise, thank you very much for attending. I hope you found that really useful. The recording will be available, so we'll get that sent out. And yeah, look forward to seeing you on the next webinar, which there is one in a couple of weeks on Social Squared, if you're interested in that. And that's how we can go through and build discussion boards inside of Teams and SharePoint. Okay, but for now, thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your day.